Hello and welcome to this lesson on workplace correspondence. This lesson targets the following course learning outcomes. Analyze diverse audience, context, and purposes to choose the most effective message structure, format, content, language, tone, and medium for the situation. Design business documents conforming to AODA requirements and standard formatting conventions. Compose and adapt content and structure of correspondence and business reports using accurate, concise, inclusive, coherent, and audience-centered language to suit a variety of purposes. Upon completion of this module, students will be able to recognize memos and letters at a glance by identifying formatting features. Choose the appropriate format, memo or letter, based upon audience. Correctly format memo and letter correspondence, and identify the components of the structure of workplace correspondence. The first question most students ask is how to choose. When do we use memo format versus letter format versus one of the digital correspondence methods like email or text messaging? Factors to consider when making this decision include whether or not we're going to send a printed or electronic document. We should remember that electronic documents are much faster and therefore preferable in situations requiring urgency. However, printed documents sent by postal mail are the only documents that are protected by confidentiality laws. So if confidentiality is important to the circumstances, then mail is still the way to go. Another factor to consider when making a decision about whether to send a memo or a letter or digital correspondence is our audience. Letters are used for external readers. This means readers who work for a company different from the company that we work for. Memos, in contrast, are used for internal readers. This means that all of our readers for a memo will be employees of the same company that we work for. This does not mean that they work in the same building. However, they do work for the same company, even if that's a branch office on the other side of the continent. Emails are non-traditional because they're a newer form of correspondence. They can be used for both internal and external readers. However, they do tend to be perceived as less formal than letters or memos. Not informal, just less formal. Do remember that all of these formats can be used to send correspondence to one or many recipients. Another factor in the decision of whether to send an email, a memo, or a letter is the purpose of the correspondence. Here are some common purposes for workplace correspondence. As we go through these, you'll note that some of them relate to internal audiences. Others relate exclusively to external audiences. Sales correspondence is typically sent to encourage prospective clients to purchase products or services. Order correspondence is used to place an order. Collection correspondence asks for payment for orders placed. Inquiry correspondence asks questions, while information correspondence provides answers to those questions or general announcements. Claims, another word for complaint, make a complaint about problematic service or products, while adjustment correspondence provides compensation in response to a claim. Acknowledgement correspondence can include thank yous, as well as recommendation letters. And finally, transmittal correspondence is when a memo or letter is used to introduce another document. An example of this is, of course, the cover letter that you send with your resume when you submit a job application. These are just some of the many purposes of correspondence. Once you've considered the channel for your message, whether print or digital, based on speed and formality, and identified your audience, whether internal or external, and your purpose, you're ready to choose the best option for your message, whether memo, letter, or email. In a moment, we will dive into the structure and content of workplace correspondence. But first, a word about ethics. Remember that correspondence should be ethical. Avoid intimidating your reader, do not plagiarize, and make sure to give your reader all the information they need to take action, to make decisions, and to fulfill their job functions. Another important rule of ethics in correspondence is to avoid liability. This means you should avoid taking responsibility for problems that are not your fault. For example, if a client emails you to complain about the toaster oven that they purchased from your store that caused an apartment fire that burned down their home and all of their belongings, that's a terrible disaster. But as the retailer for the toaster oven, you are not responsible for their apartment fire. Perhaps they were misusing the toaster. You don't have enough information to be able to take responsibility. So while you can apologize for their disappointment in the product that you sold them, you cannot put into writing that you are sorry for having caused their apartment fire. Remember that putting it in writing creates a record, and in a court of law, records are used as evidence. So don't get yourself into legal trouble for something that is not your fault. Two other important rules apply when we are trying to be ethical in our correspondence. First and foremost, we should protect confidential information, but we should also protect proprietary information. What's the difference between confidential and proprietary information? Both are types of information that should be kept secret. Confidential information typically belongs to an individual. An example of this is an employee's medical records. You may have access to those medical records as part of your job functions, but you should never share those medical records. That is private personal information that is protected by law and is between the employee and their doctor. You cannot share it. Similarly, there are certain types of information that are protected and secret and belong to companies. This is what we call proprietary information. In computer software services, proprietary information might include software algorithms that allow the software tool to function. In chemistry, the secret formula for a chemical product is proprietary. At all costs, we need to make sure that these secret types of information are kept secret. In the next slides, we will review memo format. This includes the company name, the identification of the document as a memo, a date line, to line, from line, subject line, and of course, the message itself. The first thing you might see in a memo is a letterhead. And I say you might see it in a memo because it's not required. Many companies choose to put their company name at the top of the memo, either just the name itself or the name and corporate contact information. However, it's fine to leave this off because memos are internal documents and everyone receiving them works for the same company. Everyone knows where they work, so the letterhead is not required. The first element that is required in a memo is the identification of this document as a memo. Now, the long form of this word is memorandum, but I always advise students, if you can't spell memorandum, just stick to memo. It's 4 letters and everyone understands what you mean. This word should appear at the top of the page. The next required elements in a memo are the to and from lines. List your reader by their full name and job title. List yourself by your full name and job title. This is different from an email where recipients and writers are listed by name and email address. In a memo, we do not include email addresses, we include job titles. If you need to send your message to more than one person, you can list them on separate lines after the to field. So in this example, there are 2 individual addressees. Sometimes you will send your memo to many employees. In these cases, you can group them by project title or department name. In this example, the memo is to the marketing department employees, and regardless of whether there are 5 or 500 employees in this group, every person who is a marketing employee will see a copy of this memo. Memos can also be sent to all employees. In these cases, either the memo will be distributed to every single employee in the company, or copies of the memo will be posted in public places, like a corporate bulletin board, for example. The next element in a memo is the date line. Any date format is appropriate. The last element of the memo header is the subject line. This is always the last component before the message. In fact, the date line, the to, and the from line can appear in any order as long as they appear between the word memo at the top of the page and the subject line, which comes immediately before the memo's message. To write a good subject line, remember that it should be concise and specific. Here are some examples of wordy subject lines. How might we rewrite these to be only 3 words? The first example, come to the employee picnic on August 3rd. How can we make this shorter without losing any of the essential information? Similarly, the second example, questions about dental benefits. Can we reduce this to 3 words? Finally, new schedule for computer software training. Is any information in that subject line repetitive? Here are some examples of vague subject lines. How might we rewrite these to be more specific? What questions are raised when you get an email or a memo labeled policy? What questions might you have if a memo landed on your desk that simply said pension plan or Sylvia Plath? Here are some examples of how we might rephrase these subject lines. Remember that these examples are only options for better subject lines. They are not the correct answer. There are many correct answers. So if we're looking at the examples that were wordy, here are some more concise options. Instead of come to the employee picnic on August 3rd, perhaps we write August employee picnic. Or instead of questions about dental benefit, we can reduce that to 3 words simply by reordering the words. Dental benefits question. And finally, instead of new schedule for computer software training, perhaps we could revise to software training schedule. Let's consider the examples of vague subject lines. Instead of policy, we might rephrase to be specific about which policy, in this case, the academic integrity policy. Instead of just pension plan, we might focus on what is going on with the pension plan. In this case, it's pension contribution changes. And finally, instead of just Sylvia Plath, we might focus on what's happening with Sylvia Plath. And in this case, it's that she's retiring. So try to keep your memo subject lines clear, of course, but also concise and specific. Next, let's review business letter formatting. This includes the sender's address, often in the form of a letterhead, the date, the addressee's contact information, a salutation, the message itself, a complimentary close, and the writer's signature, name, and job title. Optional elements include the enclosure line or copies line. Let's review each of these elements in the coming slides. At the top of a business letter, you will find the sender's address or letterhead. Typically, the sender's letterhead includes the company's name, its mailing address, contact details like the phone number and fax number, or a website address. The letterhead may include an email address for general inquiries. Note that this is not the letter writer's email address. It is the email address at which people can email the company in general, not a specific person at the company. The corporate logo is often also featured in the sender's letterhead. Here are some examples of different letterheads from a number of common companies that may be familiar to you. You will note that the elements of the letterhead are aligned differently in each example. The appearance of a letterhead varies because typically a company hires a graphic designer to create their stationery, to create the letterhead for its communications. If you need to create a corporate letterhead yourself, you can follow this handy template. The company's name should appear at the top. It should be bigger and bolder than everything else. The next line should include the mailing address, followed by a line with digital contact methods listed, so phone, fax, website. Here's an example with Seneca's contact information added in. Sometimes you will send letters on your own behalf rather than on behalf of a company that you work for. In these cases, you can simply list your personal address at the top of the letter instead of trying to format a personal letterhead. That said, we do sometimes see individuals mimicking corporate letterheads in the design of their own stationery. This is a great personal branding strategy, so we often see it in job applications. But the rule of thumb is that if you're writing on your own behalf, not on behalf of your company, you don't actually need a letterhead. You just need your address at the top of the page. The next element in a letter is the date. I've listed the 2 appropriate date formats for you on the screen. These are the most formal ways of formatting a date. And if you remember, letters are the most formal type of business document, so please use a formal date format in your letters. In contrast, here are a number of inappropriate date formats. Let's take a look at each one and see what's the problem. Why should we not use this for letters? In the first example, January 3rd, never include letters in the numerical date. In the second example, May 15, remember that you need to include the year to create an accurate record. Some companies have been around for more than a century, so if we find copies of old letters, we need to know which century they're from. In the third example, February 15, 2017, that comma is misplaced. Commas should follow only weekdays and dates, not months. In the fourth example, 25 June 2015, this is a format you might see if you use MLA style to document your sources, but it is incorrect in business style, so please avoid it. In the fifth example, March 6, 14, remember not to abbreviate any part of the date. Abbreviations make things less formal, and since letters are very formal, we want to write out the year in full. The same is true with the eighth example on the bottom right, Sep 26, 2019. Write out the month in full. It's a letter, it's formal. If we go one block up, we see Tuesday, August 8, 2016. There are two missing commas in that example, after Tuesday and after 8. And finally, the seventh example, 04/02/2018, is a numerical date format that is actually a little confusing. This is because the format for numerical dates varies by culture and language group. I grew up in Quebec, where the correct format for a numerical date is in one order, and in English in Canada, it's the opposite order, which means that I am perpetually confused by dates like this, which could be April 2nd or February 4th. So, for clarity and for improved formality, please stick to writing the date out in full. Month, date, comma, year, or weekday, comma, month, date, comma, year. The next element in letter format is the addressee's contact information. On the first line, provide the addressee's name. This is the person you are writing to. The second line should list their job title. The third line should list the company's name. After that, we include the company's address. This follows the same standard format as every address. It begins with a unit number, a street name, and then on the next line, city, province, and postal code. Sometimes you won't have all of the information you need to address your letter. If you're missing the name of the individual that you're writing to, you can send your letter to a department. In this example, human resources. However, sometimes you may not even be certain which department it should go to. In those cases only, it's fine to just put the company's name at the top of the addressee's information. However, it's important to remember that this means that some administrative assistant or secretary will open your letter to decide who it should go to and redirect it on your behalf. In other cases, you will be writing on behalf of your company to private individuals. In these cases, no job title is required, no company name is required. It's sufficient to put the individual's name on the first line, followed immediately by their personal address. The next element to include in formatting a letter is the salutation line. This typically begins with the word dear. Dear is the most formal greeting, and it is the standard greeting for all business letters. It's a really formal way to say hello to your reader. This is followed by the reader's full name, that is their first name and surname. The line ends with a colon. You may have been taught earlier in your schooling to put a comma in this place. That is true for friendly, informal letters. Professional letters use the colon to signal that this is a formal document. Many contemporary business letters will address readers by their first name and surname, but you may have seen examples like this one, which uses an honorific in the reader's surname. Honorifics are these short little words that signal that we respect our reader. However, in our era of growing social awareness of the gender spectrum, this type of greeting is falling out of favor because it's perceived as being quite complicated to navigate if we don't know the gender of our reader. Honorifics are typically gendered unless they refer to some kind of rank, whether in the military or in the educational system. So, doctors, whether medical or academic, can use DR in front of their surname. Military members can use rank abbreviations in front of their surname, but ordinary people need to rely on Mr., Ms., or Mix. Mr. signifies man, Ms. signifies woman, and Mix is becoming popular among people who identify as non-binary and transgender. The obvious challenge is you may not know the gender of your reader, and if you guess and guess wrong, you may offend your reader. So the safer strategy is perceived as including, instead of an honorific, simply the person's first name and surname. We will discuss the message of your letters in a moment, but before we do, I wanted to flag that there are many ways to format a letter. The format we will use in this course is called full block format. This means that all elements are aligned with the left margin. I also want to introduce you to some of the other possibilities for letter formatting, not because you need to do them in this class, but because you might encounter them in the workplace. Modified block format in this example includes all elements aligned with the left margin except for the sender's address, the date, and then that signature block with the complementary close signature and the sender's name and title. You don't need to do this in this course, but you should be aware that this is also a correct way of formatting a letter. Another format you might encounter, which is a little less common these days because it's perceived as being a little bit old-fashioned, is the modified block format with indented paragraphs. Once again, all elements are aligned to the left margin except for the sender's address, date, and that signature block. Also note that the paragraphs in this letter format are indented. I would advise against using this. As I said, this is a style that has gone out of fashion, so it's very rarely used these days. One final format to consider is the simplified format. This, again, aligns all elements to the left margin, but it uses an attention line and a subject line instead of a salutation line. Jumping right past the message content and structure to the complimentary close at the end of the letter, this is your sign-off. There are several options for the complimentary close depending on how formal your letter is. The word sincerely appears most often in formal letters, but less formal complimentary closes are also available for use, including regards or best, which is perhaps the least formal. You may have learned to write yours truly here. Yours truly is not wrong. However, it has gone out of fashion. Sometimes we will use a special close in place of a standard complimentary close. If someone has died, for example, we might use with my deepest condolences, or if someone is celebrating something like a promotion, you might finish your letter with your sincerest congratulations. After the complimentary close, sign your name. Below your signature, type in your full name as well as your job title. If you don't have a lot of space at the bottom of the page, you can put your full name and job title on the same line, separated by a comma. However, if you have extra space at the end of the page, simply bump your job title to the next line. In some letters, you may see an additional line that says enclosures or CC after the writer's signature name and job title. The word enclosures appears when there are attachments for the letter. Remember that letters are traditionally sent by postal mail, enclosed in an envelope. And so sending an attachment doesn't mean that the document is actually attached. Often these things are not stapled together. A letter is typically a collection of loose pages. So writers will include the word enclosures, often with a number, to signal how many other extra documents are included in the envelope that the reader should look for. Alternately, sometimes we will see a CC line in the same spot that an enclosure line can appear. The CC line means that this letter has been copied to someone else for their information. That's important. It's not being sent to them as a recipient, it's being sent to another party for their information. This example letter provides a good example of a scenario where this is true. It's a collection letter asking a client to pay an overdue balance owing. And it suggests that if the client needs to set up a payment plan, they should contact Mary Chapman in the Financial Services Department. A copy of the letter has been CC'd to Mary Chapman so that when this client contacts her, she knows what is going on. Finally, we get to turn our attention to the structure and content of correspondence messages. What you'll notice is that the message structure for correspondence does not change, regardless of whether we are sending our message formatted as an email or a memo or a letter. The structure stays the same. The opening states what the purpose of the message is. We should get directly to the point in the opening sentence. This is followed by a short background that gives background information or context that our reader needs to be able to make sense of the message and to understand the situation that has produced this message. The next structural section of correspondence is details. This is where you will provide the details and facts of the situation in the most logical sequence to help the reader understand the situation, the action required, and based on these facts, your reader will need to make a decision or take action. So your facts should be clear, specific, relevant, and complete. Finally, end your correspondence message with a closing that states what should be done next. Politely request any required action, and of course, remember to thank the reader. Always aim to keep your message short, specific, and focused on the topic and on the reader's needs. Let's take a look at some example correspondence to see this structure at work. Here is a sample memo. It's identified as a memo at the top of the page. Next, the date is clearly listing the date of the month itself, and the year. We have a from line with the writer's name and job title. We have a to line that indicates this memo is going to all employees. And the subject line is the December pay date. Let's take a look at the message and identify the opening, background, details, and closing. Barb Andrews has written, "Please remember that the December pay date will fall on December 20th instead of December 31st due to the winter holiday." So the message gets right to its point, that there is a change in the pay schedule. It provides the reason for that change, the winter holidays. The details section provides the information readers need to take action and make decisions about things like whether they can pay their rent on January 1st, or whether they'll be able to cover the cost of all of those Christmas presents when their visa bill comes in January. So Barb has written, "Your pay is being processed early because, as you know, the company will be closed between December 21st, 2023 and January 3rd, 2024. Pay will be processed as usual in January, the January pay date falling on the last day of the month." Readers now have all the information they need to balance their own finances throughout the coming weeks. Finally, the message closing asks for action from the readers. Barb has requested, "Please contact me at extension 2256 if you have any payroll-related questions. Thanks for your understanding." Here is a sample letter. Let's consider, what is the purpose of the letter? In other words, where is the opening? Where is the context given in this letter? Where is the background? We might expect to find these elements in the first few sentences. So let's read through paragraph 1 and see if we can figure this out. "Dear Mr. Eaglefeather, thank you for purchasing our product and for taking the time to contact us about it. We apologize for the unsatisfactory condition of your pasta Alfredo dinner." Take note that this letter actually begins with the background. It first establishes the context that an unsatisfied client, Mr. Eaglefeather, has contacted the company to complain about an unsatisfactory product. And of course, then it goes directly to the purpose, an apology for this disappointing product. So where are the details of this message? We saw that paragraph 1 included background and the opening. So let's take a look at paragraph 2 for the details. Paragraph 2 says, "Quality is of paramount importance to all of us at Superior Foods, and great care is taken in the preparation and packaging of all our products. Our quality assurance staff has been notified of the problem you reported. Although Superior Foods does not issue cash refunds, we have enclosed 3 coupons redeemable at your grocery for complimentary Superior dinners of your choice." Remember that the details are meant to allow a reader to take action and make decisions. So the first detail that we get in this letter is an expression of corporate values, that Superior Foods values quality. The next detail we get is the action already taken, that the quality assurance staff has been notified of the problem. And finally, we get compensation details. No cash refunds, but 3 coupons for superior dinners. Finally, let's look to the last paragraph for the closing. The writer has written, "We appreciate this opportunity to be of service, and we hope you will continue to enjoy our products." Remember that a closing typically includes an action request as well as a thank you to the reader. This one begins with a thank you, "We appreciate," and of course it includes an action request. "We hope you will continue to enjoy our products." Let's take a look at one more example letter to try to identify the message structure. Now, this example has a slightly unexpected appearance. Many people think that letters and memos are primarily text only or paragraphs only, but that's not true. Letters and memos can, in fact, use headings, charts, graphs, tables like this one, even graphics. Don't let the appearance distract you from the underlying correspondence structure. Let's read through this letter and identify the opening, background, details, and closing. This is a letter from Carl Bradbury, the vice principal at Southton High School, to Value Plus, office supplies. Dear Value Plus, it's time once again for Southton High to order a shipment of custom printed, spiral-bound notebooks for use by our students. So, this letter's first paragraph includes the opening and the background. The purpose of this message, the opening, is to order new spiral-bound notebooks for students. The background, the context, is that this is not the first order. And we know this from those keywords right at the start of the letter. It's time once again. And that, of course, signals that there have been previous orders. Let's look at the details. You may charge the following order to our account, number 2468. This gives, of course, account information. But the rest of the information needed for an employee of Value Plus to pack and ship the order is included in the table, including catalog numbers, quantities for each item, a description of each item, unit costs, totals, and of course, costs for taxes and shipping. The letter ends, "Please provide blue covers with the gold SHS logo, which you have on file, and ship as promptly as possible." So of course that closing asks for action to ship all of these notebooks to this high school for the students to use. Carl Bradbury would do well to remember to be polite to his reader and to say thank you at the end of his letter. This concludes our lesson on workplace correspondence. Please return to the module for more information, details, and activities.